And we are good. All right. So we're going to continue. Well, let me get back to, so I have not finished, but I've begun grading your papers. Most of you did not get the ones that I graded because I'm just going to email them to you directly, not put them um, in Blackboard, just so that they can remain private. Because a lot of you used Word, and so Word has to be all this conversion, and I want to make sure that you see all the any of the changes. But let me speak a little generally about some of the things that like an easy problem, and I say an easy problem is so an easy fix problem is that many of you list, or some of you listed your, when you write your thesis statement and you said I'm gonna explore imagery, let's say symbolism and imagery, symbolism, I'm trying to think of some of the popular ones, and theme, right? Imagery, symbolism, and the theme of something, right? That you say in that order, but the body paragraphs, instead of the first one being on imagery, the second one being on symbolism, and this one being on theme, sometimes the body paragraph starts out with theme and then goes to imagery and then symbolism. They're just not the right order. So the order of the body paragraph should follow the same order that they're listed in the thesis statement. So that's one thing I've seen. And I think that's an easy fix, right? You just say, oh, it's just the order. Just either change the thesis statement or change the order of the papers, and you'll be fine. Um, so that's an easy fix. Some of the, I also identified a couple papers that don't have a thesis statement, but clearly talk about, one paragraph may talk about symbolism, another paragraph may talk about imagery, another paragraph may talk about theme, but they doing the body paragraphs, but they just never got around to talking about the poem, doing the thesis statement in the poem. Um, that's another common thing I've seen, not a common, a thing I've seen more than once um, in the paper. The other thing I've seen, there's minor things that we'll just go over once everybody has their paper, so it won't be until next week. But I mean, you'll get your papers today because I'm going to work. I worked on half of them and have the other half, and I just decided, since I have to email them, I'm just going to email them all tonight. So you'll have all your papers to look at, but we'll go over them when we see each other next week. I was trying to rush and get them done today, but I spend about 20 minutes on each paper, 20 or 25 minutes grading each paper. So if you do the math, I grade 2 to 3 papers an hour. So if I have 18 papers to read, it takes me 7 or 8 hours to get through all the papers, to get to the whole class. I try to do it faster, but it just never works out that way. Somebody even had me put like an egg timer. So I'll put an egg timer so that you could keep track, but it doesn't, that doesn't work for me. So it just takes me a while, and that's okay for me and not for you, because I know you want your grades. So so yeah, so you'll look for them, you'll look at them, but I'm trying to think of some common things I saw. Um, you know, um, I write comments in the comment section, and sometimes um, they're um, I'm trying to think there, because I'm a lot of specific issues come to mind, but I'm trying to think of the more general ones. But for the most part, I will say that people the papers I've graded, one of the great things that everybody has got is that everybody understands the structure of an essay. They understand an introduction, they understand the body paragraphs, and they got a conclusion. So all the papers I've graded, the first whatever 6, 7, or 8 papers that I've graded have all, in terms of the structure, it's been very apparent that you understand that. So that's a big plus. So a common great thing I see in all the papers is that there's an understanding of structure. The other thing I will say that's great is that most of you pretty much have understand the poem you're writing about, right? There is an understanding, knowledge, deciphering that has been successful in that. And the other thing is, for the most part, I think with the exception of very few, when you are speaking about a poetic element, it is the poetic element that you're speaking about, right? And so what that means is that sometimes I encounter papers where a student may say, might use something like metaphor is used in the paper, and then this paragraph does not talk about metaphor at all. It talks about a theme, or it talks about something else, but it doesn't talk about metaphor. So I don't encounter that. I didn't encounter that too much, but that's something else that I did encounter once, one or two. But that's another thing always to be aware of. That which is why a lot of times when I say what, like it may seem didactic, and didactic is a word that means like, like almost obvious or almost overstating something, right? Or too much extra. But that's why some of the reasons why I say to define the term, because if you say I'm going to speak about symbolism, and the symbol is when something is representing something else, if you continue that line, you'll see it. But if you write something's a metaphor and then you don't really explain what a metaphor is and you start talking about something completely different, I'll say that. I'll say, this, what you said sounds great, but it's not talking about a metaphor. It's something else that you're talking about. So you have to be consistent, either change the topic of the sentence and don't say it's about metaphor, say it's about what you actually write about, whether it's identity, a theme, whatever it is you talk about, and then make that the topic of it instead of stating a topic that you don't explore. But anyway, those are some of the broad stroke things. So overall, good thing I have not found the failing paper. Is that good news? That's good news, right? And I think that's so far. So then we'll keep going. There are no F's so far, so good. Um, and a couple of good grades. So feel excited about that. So that excites me when papers are, when I feel the groove, it makes me very excited, and when I don't, it makes me sad. I'm like, oh my god, I gotta figure this out. I may have to have a meeting with this person, so we could work that out. All right. So and I know I was late. There's just a lot happening, but I was late with doing the sticks thing. So we're gonna go into sticks. That's the plan today. And then we're gonna talk about another very short story that we're gonna read together in class. And then I won't see you for a week because Monday is a holiday. And so then it's depending on what calendar you want to look at, but it's either Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, or but either way, we don't have class on Monday. So I won't see you until next week, Wednesday. And so I'll talk about what we'll do between now and then. So basically, you're going to read a story, and it depends on how much we get done today. So I wanted to go back to review a little bit of what we did yesterday, Monday, which was a lot, right? So we looked at the elements of fiction handout. We talked about the three main elements, right, of fiction, which are plot, characters, and setting. And we also talked about dramatic structure, that kind of triangle looking thing that talked about exposition, that talked about rising action, that claimed the climax, and then falling action and a denouement, or some kind of resolution or final act to the stories, and that most stories will follow that. I think I mentioned that it comes from theater. Very often theater has that, like the plays have a structure like that. And sometimes the climax very often happens in the third act, if it's a 3-act play, right? Or in the second act. But the climax even in theater can happen at any time, right? But sometimes there is a kind of coming in for a landing after the climax. And so sometimes in theater, it usually comes a little later, and sometimes it can come in fiction. But we did that. We also talked about point of view, right? First person point of view, third person point of view, and second person point of view. And I'm just letting somebody into class. All right, so we also talked about point of view. So those are I would say, if we take the broad strokes of the elements of fiction handout, that and we went into depth with each of those. Like we talked more about setting, that it's not just the location, but it could be the time of day, it could be the geography, it could be the historical time period. With characters, we talked about different types of characters, in addition to the main character, which very often is the protagonist, to an antagonist, which goes against them, is trying to get them in the way. In terms of plot, we talked about, what is plot? Plot is more the cause and effect, not necessarily the telling of the story. And those were the kind of big broad strokes that we talked about. And then we read the short story Sticks, and we read it once together. We talked a little bit about it. We identified that it was told in first person. And then I asked you to do two things, and we can talk about them now. If you got to do them, you're going to make me happy. And let me just actually take a look at, because I literally was grading right up until class time, since 2. And all right, so 6 of you did the assignment, and great. If you didn't, I encourage you to do it. But the 6 of you, and we'll figure out some extra credit prize or something for all of you who made the effort to get it in um, extra hit points. But so I want to talk about these. We will talk about the elements of fiction and also the climax. So so bear with me for one moment. Since we have 6, what I'm going to do is maybe I could try a fun activity if it works. Maybe I'll test it. I'm going to test it out. Okay. So as I'm prepping this page, one of the things that we can talk about if we address um, the issue of the climax, let's talk about the climax a little bit. That the climax is usually, well, I'll say a couple things. A climax usually happens with the first character, right? The main character is affected. The climax has the biggest impact on the main character, and or an activity that is that involves the main character. So let's say if somebody wanted to, I'm trying to think of there's a story. It's very short. Many people don't know it, but there is the story of a man who's trying to save his boxing um, training hall, and he struggles, and the whole story is about his struggle to save it, and everybody trying to help him struggle to save it, and then he dies, right? And so then there's this like, what's the point of saving it, right? And then there's the whole idea of them dealing with his death and selling the thing and all that kind of stuff. So in a way, was what was the driving factor and the whole purpose of the story was whether they can save the boxing thing, and the person who was most invested in it, which was the man, died. All right. So then that was that the driving force was gone, and so then that was that the climax of that particular one was that. Okay. So I'm going to take. So let's talk a little bit more about the. I'm going to look at what you all wrote here, which I can see, and
Professor, I'm sorry.
mhm.
I was trying to send it directly to Blackboard, but I was having problems. It couldn't find the document. I don't know if the one that I actually posted is the one.
Yeah, it's there.
I know it's there, but I don't know if it's actually the one. But I send you the other one to the other email again because of that reason. I explained.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, but it looks fine. I just saw it. So let me just bring sticks up on the screen. Let's just read it again. One second. All right. So here's, let me make me small. All right. So here's the story, right? And in it, um, I'll just read it because this is short. Every year, Thanksgiving night, we flocked out behind Dad as he dragged the Santa suit to the road and draped it over a kind of crucifix he'd built out of a metal pole in the yard. Super Bowl week, the pole was dressed in a jersey and Rod's helmet, and Rod had to clear it with Dad if he wanted to take the helmet off. On the 4th of July, the pole was Uncle Sam. On Veterans Day, a soldier. On Halloween, a ghost. The pole was Dad's only concession to glee. We were allowed a single Crayola from the box at a time. One Christmas Eve, he shrieked at Kimmy for wasting an apple slice. He hovered over us as we poured ketchup, saying, "Good enough, good enough, good enough." Birthday parties consisted of cupcakes and no ice cream. The first time I brought a date over, she said, "What's with your dad and that pole?" And I sat there blinking, right? We left home, married, and had children of our own, found the seeds of meanness blooming also within us. Dad began dressing the pole with more complexity and less discernible logic. He draped some kind of fur over it on Groundhog Day and lugged it out a floodlight to ensure a shadow. When an earthquake struck Chile, he laid the pole on its side and spray painted a rift in the earth. Mom died, and he dressed the pole as death and hung from the crossbar photos of mom as a baby. We stopped by and find talismans from his youth arranged around the base, army medals, theater tickets, old sweatshirts, tubes of mom's makeup. One autumn, he painted the pole bright yellow. He covered it with cotton swabs that winter for warmth and provided offspring by hammering in 6 cross sticks around the yard. He ran lengths of string between the poles and the sticks and taped the string letters of apology, admission of error, pleas for understanding, all written in a frantic hand on index cards. He painted a sign saying love and hung it from the pole, and another that said forgive. And then he died in the hall with the radio on, and we sold the house to a young couple who yanked out the pole and the sticks and left them by the road on garbage day. Okay, and I asked you to look. We determined that the point of view was first person. We determined that in class, and then I had you look at the other two questions, right? Can you identify and discuss the elements of fiction, character, plot, and setting, uh, and in terms of dramatic structure, can you identify and explain the climax of the story? So let's go first to characters. To characters. So who are the characters? Who are the characters? Well, one, we talked about the narrator, right?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And what are the characters? What characters did we meet?
The father,
The father, right? So we have the narrator,
Rob,
we have the
the pole.
Rod. Who's Rod? Who's Rod?
His son.
Right, one of the brothers, because that's the one he took his
His
helmet,
son.
put it on there and said, you know, he had a clear with dad, right? So we get the narrator is one of the sons, Rod is another son, right? How many kids do you think they had? Why do you say that?
3? What?
because when he posted the apology letters, he did 6 crosses that symbolize his offspring.
Right. He doesn't exactly, he alludes to other siblings, but he doesn't give us a number, but that gives us an indication there probably were 6 of them, right? So we've got, so we know there's, so, and then the young person brings a date home, right? So there's another character. We learned that there was a mother, so that's another character. One of you wrote the pole, right? So the pole in a way is a character in this story. It's not a character in the traditional sense, but it's a character in the story. So those are the characters, right? What about the setting? Talk to me about the
I
setting.
think the setting. I mean, it starts off with every year at Thanksgiving, but then again, you can tell that it's in their home, like in the dad's
Yeah,
home.
that's what I said.
Mhm.
Isn't there?
Yeah.
Like,
So the setting is mainly based in their home and in the yard, right? That's the main of the action takes place. We know the action also takes place different times of the year. Because as I think it was Ninoshka or somebody was just speaking, they were saying Thanksgiving, but it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, it's Groundhog Day, right? That's part of it as well. But we don't get a whole lot of setting, right? We don't get a whole lot of it. We know it's a house, right? So it's not gonna, it doesn't sound like it's in the middle of a city, right? It's a home. And then what about the plot? So tell me about the plot. What happens in this story?
so,
Yeah, that's not me speaking. Is you're
put,
muted right
like,
now. Okay.
oh, you can hear me now.
Yes.
But I put that the story is about his dad and his like obsession with decorating the pole on holidays and special events that like he holds special for himself. Yeah, that's what I put the plot.
Okay. So that's definitely some of the things that are happening. The father certainly has an obsession with this pole. Um, all right, what else?
He was also very frugal,
Hmm.
which I thought it was kind of excessive, you know, his way he was frugal, that he would give his kids one crayon each, you know, instead of
Yeah,
giving them the box. You know, they will only have cupcakes for birthday celebrations and no ice cream.
yeah. So he gives us a pretty interesting characterization of the father, right? That's the one we get the most information about, right? That was two examples, right? That Gregory just shared. Another thing was, he was watching how much ketchup they put on stuff, and he was kind of always on top of them. Um, it said that the only glee, right, and glee is joy he had was the pole, right? That was the narrator's perception, was the only glee was that pole, right? But didn't he have 6 kids and a wife? Didn't he find glee in any of them? But no, maybe he did, because remember, again, this is the point of view of the storyteller, right? Which is one of the sons who ended up leaving the house, right? Ended up as his siblings did, right? They all ended up leaving. So so you get a good sense of the characterization of the father. You get some sense of the mother too, right? Because she's the kind of a just there on the sideline, and the kids, because when he brings home his date, right, and she asks him, "What's with your father in that pole?" He just sits there blinking, like, right. That's what he says. Doesn't even have a response. So there's something emotionally closed about them, about these characters, right? And John Saunders almost tells this story unemotionally. Like he's like, this happened and this happened and this, them, and even the moment when the mother dies, he says mom died, and then he keeps going, and then later on he says dad died, and it's just like this. There isn't a different levels happening. Everything's happening on this kind of very even tone in the story. Now, let's get to the climax. And I put down. I did that. Hold on a second. I can't minimize. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, I wasn't. Oh, sorry, I wasn't even sharing the screen. Sorry, I'm going to share it now. So first, let's read what you all said. Those of you who were able to get something in. Okay. The climax of the story is when the mom died and the father's decorations became less visible and more complicated for his family to understand. The pole was his way of communicating with the world. The father then adds sticks to represent the kids with apology letters for all his ways of being a father growing up. The climax of the story is when they left home and got married with kids. The climax of the story is when right before the dad dies, he writes letters of apology to his offspring on different crosses. The crosses represent his kids and he loved and hoped he can get forgiveness from them. This pole was the way the father expressed himself and what he loved. The house was sold and thrown away right after his death. Um, the climax of the story would be when, after the kids were all grown and left home, they got married and have a family of their own. The dad began dressing the pole with more complexity. When his wife died, he dressed the pole representing death with a picture of his wife as a baby hanging over it. Thus, this symbolizes his declining in mental health. Also, at one point, he ran a string connecting to the pole and sticks with notes of apology, admissions of error, pleas for understanding, and words love and forgive. A message clearly to his sons for all those years of obsession with his metal pole and not being a father to them. He didn't have it directly to him to apologize to his kids, and so to the pole says it all. The climax of the sticks was when the father apologized to his kids by painting the pole bright yellow and hammering 6 cross sticks to tape letters of apology, admissions of error, forgiveness, and love. He then died after that. Climax when the narrator starts explaining that they're all grown, they had their family, their dad had planted the seed of madness within his kid. It's meanness, so they're mean. Also, the way he dressed his pole was even more complex and strange, and a lot of things didn't make sense. A series of events happened after that. The mother died, so it created a bigger problem in his emotional behavior. So there seems to be a consensus, at least a little bit, at least 2 or 3 talk about when people leave, right? Or when people leave with the apology. So Yeah, it's always an interesting exercise because I said maybe sometimes we'll agree or disagree. So let's think about what I said in terms of like trying to identify the climax. So it happens to the main character. In this case, who do you think the main character is?
Dad.
Father, right? And it's the right,
Father.
it's the father, right? Because even though there's a book called The Great Gatsby. Has anybody ever read that? It's a really short book. It's really good, but it's called The Great Gatsby, and the whole
Yes.
book is told. Okay, so it's told from the point someone else is telling Gatsby's story. So Gatsby is the main character of the story, but the narrator is telling the story. So the narrator isn't not always the main character. So so in this case, the narrator is telling the story of his father. So the story is about his father, and everything happens to the father, right? The father, makes the sticks. The father has the wife die. You all pick that up very good, very perceptive. That when he finds himself alone, right, then he realizes, like alone, not what he always has the sticks, but when he had, when he loses his family, his kids move away, he starts asking for forgiveness, right? And that's where there's a bit of sadness in the story because I guess maybe the damage he did, it was hard for the kids to take any of that seriously. But he's older and he was looking for forgiveness. So and then
It was, when I was reading this, it was really hard for me to say if he was good or bad. He had his ways, but it's only when in the second paragraph when the son says, "We got married, we had children," and then he said, "Found the seeds of meaning blooming also within us."
and how do you understand that?
Well, for the son, he felt his father was mean.
Hmm.
Maybe because they only was able to have one crayon instead of a box of crayon. Or you can't put too much ketchup.
Right.
But I mean, if that's the case, my mom is mean.
Mhm.
But
I am.
it was hard to identify if he was a good dad or a bad dad. But
Yeah. Well, there's something, Gregory, that's in literature that whether you trust the narrator, right? Whether we trust what he's telling us. And in this case, he was very consistent in his portrayal of who the father was, right? That all the things that the father did, he was very consistent up until the point it was too late when they all leave the house, right? So so a group of you feel that a climax in the story is when they leave, right? And why? And I think the sense of that. So those of you who think that, or those of you who agree, what makes you think that? And Mabel has her hand up. So go, Mabel. You can either answer my question or say what you want to say.
I was gonna add on to what Greg was saying because that was a part for me that was interesting, where the narrator then starts to talk about how his father's behavior is translated to how he was upbringing his children, and then when you mentioned The Great Gatsby, I feel like when you're reading a story and it's the narrator is not the main character, um, it's a perspective. So there's always that part of what we don't know, of the unknown for us as the readers.
Mhm.
So when you were just saying whether to fully trust the narrator, right? Because it's just like this is his experience of his father
Right.
and stuff. And then now that he has children, him and his children have grown and they have their own families, and they find themselves probably exhibiting similar behaviors that the father did. Is more like similar to what Greg was saying, like um maybe he wasn't mean and maybe there's some level of understanding, but also like, is this something that I want to continue so that it can then continue to happen with my children when they move away and come in?
Hmm. Well, it's interesting. It's perceptive to figure out, to decide whether you can trust the narrator, right? Because you are learning about a story and you have to remember that it's somebody's point of view, right? And it's the narrator's point of view. It's just how he sees his father, how he experiences it, right? So that's perceptive. Is that a hand, Sessa? Did you raise your hand or no? Oh, okay.
No, I like. Can I disagree with
With what?
this climb with the climax?
Oh, should no. We're like we haven't. Yes, you may, because we haven't made a definitive idea. What's your contribution? I just said again, if anybody agrees with the, maybe explain more about that the children leave. But you tell me, what were you going to say?
I kind of disagree because isn't the climax supposed to like for the protagonist, which is the main character, correct?
Mhm.
So in this story, to me, the main character would be the father, not the narrator.
Mhm.
So the climax is supposed to make the change of something, the change of the father, not the change of the narrator.
Right. So yes, so the climax would have to happen. The father would have to be very involved in the climax, right? Whatever happens to it. So so I could see. Okay, let me just maybe do a little bit of shorthand. I could see how people might think that the kids leaving could be climactic, right? Because in a certain sense, if we look at the story, that the kid, no, it's okay. I'm gonna that the kids leaving could be climactic, right? Because um, after the kids leave, actually the father's activity gets crazier, right? Like after the father leaves, he starts doing the groundhog thing, and so the father's activity doesn't change, right? And what is the father's activity? It's the father and these sticks, right? And it's about the father first holidays, and then doing the symbolic things, and then the kid's gone and his wife is gone, and then he's still with the sticks, making the kids and making the signs and then using it. So the activity is usually with the father and the sticks. So kind of like when all that activity ends is when.
When the mother died.
Actually, when the father
When he
dies. Because after the mother
father
dies, he
dies.
continues with that activity, right? It gets a little weird, but he's still doing this. So through the whole story, it's the father and these sticks, whether he's being weird and disassociated, whether he's asking for forgiveness, whether he's explaining his grief. It's his life is all about those sticks. And as long as he and the sticks are going, that is what's happening. That's the action of the story. And then suddenly the father dies. And what happens to the sticks? They become garbage. They become meaningless. They've lost their meaning,
Yeah.
altogether. So the climax very often is the thing. Now, sometimes people can argue that maybe there have been debates in my classes around this story because there is a father does have a change, right? After the mother dies. Somebody said that, right? Somebody just said that. After the mother dies, he becomes a little more remorseful if we look at the text, right? Um, you know, um, when mom died, right, he dressed the pole as death, right? But there's still weirdness, right? And then the baby pictures, and then the talismans from his youth, and then he paints it yellow, and then he puts the cotton swab. So even after the mom dies, the activity still seems the same, right? And then later on, he starts building the offspring and all that, and asks for forgiveness. But then he dies, right? It's just like that. He dies, and then they sell the house, and so the whole story is about dad and this lawn and these sticks that he did, and then suddenly he dies, and it's over, right? That story is the end. There's no going back, and the ending is very fast. They sell the house, they throw out the sticks, and that's it. So so what do you think?
I made an observation, Professor, reading the
Mhm,
story on my own.
mhm.
And Gregory, remember how you said that he had probably like mental problems? He was a veteran because it talks about medals, army medals. So probably he became a little um, mentally not okay because of that. Sometimes it leaves.
Yeah, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I could say that's a fair observation, but we also don't want to and I think we can
Judge,
say it again.
but I think it
No,
wasn't fair.
not judge, not judge. I'm saying like sometimes you just have to be aware of stereotypes, right? That
Okay.
for us to think of a stereotype as a person who I mean, who goes to, it's not anybody in the army, but you're right. Some people that experience war, people that go into battle,
Yeah.
that's a lot, right? And so it's not necessarily a stereotype. It is something
I'm
that
not
is,
trying to stereotype, but the reason, because I try, when I read something, I try to go more in depth, like to read
Mhm.
between the lines.
yeah,
Sometimes
that's
the
good.
author, that's what they try to do. And that's what I think it unfair there when they were saying about the talisman and the medals. So it was like giving you a reason of things that would let you know what's going on with him, why he's
Right.
like that.
It can give you a reason, but definitely there was something unusual about this dad, right? He was like, he was this obsession, as somebody said that, the very first person that spoke, accurately described the pose as an obsession. Mabel?
Actually, I wanted to agree with you because the climax for me was also the dad death because I feel like hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's a
Oh,
little
okay.
muffled, but I can make it out.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's the mask.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was the climax for me because it was just, like you said, all the things that he was fixating on, and then it comes to an abrupt stop. I actually genuinely enjoyed the story. I kind of like stories that end this way
Mhm.
because I feel like um it brings up more questions. Like now I wonder, like, do his kids have other habits that they obsess over, right? Because if you became just as frugal as your dad with your children, then maybe there's some other things that you haven't noticed that you've picked up on. So
Right.
yeah, when the dad died, I was just like, wow, plot twist. Now there's
Yes.
no more stakes, there's no more anything. And then what's next? Now what is the narrator going to share with us about
Mhm.
his grief
Yes.
and how this just ended?
All right. Why don't we take one more? Gregory has a comment. Okay, let's do your comment and then we'll
Okay.
move on.
All right, I'll be quick. I mean, I wrote also the climax as like everyone else. I mean, most of the people wrote about, when he painted the pole yellow and stuff like that. But and then I was doing this observation and looking at it again. I can see when the kids left that was a climax also because that's when his things started changing where it says it became more complexity and less discernible logic.
Mhm.
It's like the way he would dress these poses became a little like it. There was really no kind of, how can you say, no logic to it. I mean, the
Right.
other ones were like Christmas, Thanksgiving, Santa Claus and all those 4th of July. But and then when after the kids left, that's when the son was saying that, it became more complexity and less discernible logic.
But what dramatically changed for the father?
Loneliness.
Well, not at that moment, right? Because, right? I mean, that could be it. That could be that. But remember that it has to be something that's dramatic that they can't come back from, right? A climax is something that just changes the whole course of the story, right? And so at that point, that could be considered more rising action, right? Because that's what happens with rising action. Like something happens, but it keeps propelling the story forward, and the climax happens, and something completely changes. It's like, and this one is kind of definitive. Like he died. That's it. There's no more polls. There's no more story. There's no more. There's no more of that happening inside of it. So, but I want you all to, and this story with these 2 paragraphs, you could write a whole essay on this story. I mean, we've used like almost a whole freaking class today, a second class talking about it. I got to get to the next story today, but you could talk about it because there's a lot that happens. I think that it's a rich story, and but whatever you do when you're writing your stories and you could, that's the thing, you could make an argument, right? But you have to be clear on what the term is that you're arguing, and then make the argument. Because I think there was a student really feels that I had a student that really felt that when the mother died, that was the turning point, because that's when he shortly, it's not, because I mean, like, I told her, well, we went back and forth. Part of it is because I understood that she was making the connection of the mother dying, and then the big turning point for him right, which is a turning point, right, is when he becomes remorseful, right? That through the whole story, excuse me, he is, crazy. Right? He's acting crazy, like doing things and painting the pole and everything like that. And then there's something changes, right? There is a change that happens after, shortly after the mother dies, right? That when he becomes remorseful, that is the difference, right? That is a transformation that does happen with the father. So I let her have it, because she really felt that was a transformation in the story for her, and that part of so you could make the argument of that. For me, the clearest one is the father dying, but you can make an argument about the other transformation that happens to him, because it happens to the protagonist and he becomes very different, is when he puts the 6 poles and starts stringing strings and asking for forgiveness, right? And asking for love, right? And some of the things that he did not demonstrate, at all. So, George Saunders, thank you for this story, right? This little tiny story. It always is a good way to kick off our fiction section. We're gonna do one other small story, not as small as George Saunders, but one that's just a couple of pages, and we should be able to read it and begin talking about it. If we get to finish talking about it, great, and if not, then we'll talk about it when we see each other again. And you'll read either way. You're going to read another story, one more story, between now and then. So the next story we're going to read is called One of These Days. If you're following the syllabus, I'm moving a little bit because the dates skip. So there's a story called A&P that we were going to read, but we probably won't read that. And I might create an extra credit assignment around it. So if any of you are interested in doing that, but I'll do that. Whatever stories we're going to get to, we'll kind of build in some extra credit assignments. But the story we're going to read is One of These Days, and it's by a writer named Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Has anyone heard of that writer? I got one head nod. Okay. Two, no, okay, cool. I mean, a lot of people know he is considered, one of the great South American writers. He's from Colombia, and he's known for magical realism, which is, is very interesting. I read something on magical realism and an interesting essay that they were trying to create the origin of the word. So if you think of the word magical realism, right? The two words that almost like crash, right? Because one says magical and one says real, right? And it's magic real depending on where you live, depending on what your practice is. You might, it might be real, so it might not be this term of magical realism. But magical realism. So let me share a PowerPoint with you all, and we'll begin discussing it, and then we're on the slide. Okay, short story. One of these days. If we just think of the topic, right? Now, I'm not going to go back to the thing. Just hearing the thing, one of these days. What does that mean? What does one of these days mean when you hear that phrase, one of these days?
Hope.
Hope. Okay. Yes, definitely hope. Anything else come to mind when you hear one of these days? When would somebody say one of these days?
A threat.
A threat, definitely, right? Any other thoughts on one of these days?
Something in the future.
Life-changing event.
A life-changing event? Possibly, right? Was someone else going to say something?
Something in the future.
Something in the future, right? But anyway, when you hear that phrase, one of these days, there is that idea that could be something that's going to happen, right? Or you might want to happen, right? It could have the connotation of a threat, like one of these days, I'm gonna get you, right? Or it could be one of these days, I'm gonna have a house, by the beach, But it could have different connotations, right? So it's always interesting to look at a title of a work and to wonder about it for a little bit, before, or at some point. It doesn't have to be before you read the story. So this is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He was born in 1927 in Colombia, as I mentioned. He died in 2014, and he died in Mexico City, Mexico. He lived in Mexico for a long time. But he's known as a he's a novelist. He's written many, many great stories. He won the Nobel Prize, which is a big prize, and you get lots of money. And for his masterpiece called Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude, which is a wonderful book. I'm looking up my shelf because I need to get my books together. And it's very thick, but it's a very good read. It's a good read. He was the fourth Latin American to be honored with the Nobel Prize, and others were Gabriel Mistral, but Pablo Neruda won the Nobel Prize in '71 before him. And the other was a Guatemalan artist named Miguel Angel Asturias. So with Jorge Luis Borges, Garcia Marquez is known as the best known Latin American writer in history. He's known all over the world. And I could continue reading his bio, but it's just, he's won many awards. He's been translated into many languages, and he's extremely well known around the world. There's a little bit more about him. He was born in 1927 in a small town. Is in the tropical part of Colombia, near the mountains in the Caribbean Sea. He grew up with his grandmother, right? His grandfather was pensioned colonel from the Civil War at the beginning of the century. He went to a Jesuit college and began to read law, but his studies were soon broken off for his work as a journalist. So in 1954, he went to Rome, and since then he lived abroad. He lived in Rome and New York, and Barcelona and Mexico, and he's more or less, he says a compulsory exile means that he loved living in other countries, even though he considered Colombia his home, and very much Colombia is in his works. So he's written fiction, but he's also written plays, and he has a lot of articles as a journalist. Like many Latin American intellectuals, he felt compelled to speak out about political issues. He viewed the world from a left-wing perspective, bitterly opposing General Augusto Pinochet, the right-wing Chilean dictator, and he supported Fidel Castro and Mr. Castro, and he became close friends. So he's known as a master of magical realism, and I love seeing this phrase here, magical realism, in which the marvelous and the real converge, right? So that's what happens in magical realism. They're set like with real life characters, but sometimes fantastic, not like woohoo fantastic, but fantasy kind type things happen to them. In his stories, it says storms rage for years, flowers drift from the skies, tyrants survive for centuries, priests levitate and corpses fail to decompose. And more plausibly, lovers rekindle their passion after half a century apart. So these are kind of the fantastic things that happen in his book, in his terms. Magical realism, he said, sprang from the Latin American history of vicious dictators and romantic revolutionaries, of long years of hunger, illness, and violence. In accepting his Nobel Prize, Mr. Garcia Marquez said, poets and beggars, musicians and prophets, warriors and scoundrels, all creatures of the unbridled reality. We have had to ask but little of imagination, for our crucial problem has been lack of conventional means to render our lives believable. He's saying in that, like, this group of people who know struggle, who know poverty, who know, difficulty, that the fact that they still live, and have to be so creative in order to keep living, that makes their lives believable, right? And those are both from the New York Times. All right, so here's why I read this story. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm going to read it. It's one of these days, okay? Monday dawned warm and rainless. Aurelio Escobar, a dentist without a degree and a very early riser, opened his office at 6. He took some false teeth, still mounted in their plastic mold, out of the glass case and put it on the table, a fistful of instruments which he arranged in size order, as if they were on display. He wore a collarless striped shirt, closed at the neck with a goldston stud and pants that held up by suspenders. He was erect and skinny with what looked like with a look that corresponded to the situation the way deaf people have of looking, right? That's his. So he's describing his first character, right? Monday dawned warm and rainless. Aurelio Escala, a dentist without a degree and a very early riser, opened his office at 6, right? Open. I don't know any dentist that opens at 6 a.m., but this one does. He took some false teeth, still mounted in their plastic mold, out of the glass case, put them on the table, a fifth full of instruments, which he arranged in size order, right? Put everything very neat. As if they were on display, he wore a collarless striped shirt, closed at the neck, all the way closed up with a golden stud, right? Pants that held up by suspenders. He was erect and skinny with a look that rarely corresponded to the situation. That's the look on his face, the way deaf people have of looking. When he had things arranged on the table, he pulled the drill toward the dental chair and sat down to polish the false teeth. He seemed not to be thinking about what he was doing, but worked steadily, pumping the drill with his feet, even when he didn't need it. After 8, he stopped for a while to look at the sky through the window, right? So for over 2 hours, he's just cleaning stuff in his office. Excuse me. And he saw 2 pensive buzzards who were drying themselves in the sun on the ridgepole on the house next door. He went on working with the idea that before lunch, it would rain again. The shrill voice of his 11-year-old son interrupted his concentration. Papa! What? The mayor wants to know if he'll pull his tooth. Tell him I'm not here. He was polishing a gold tooth. He held it at arm's length and examined it with his eyes half closed. His son shouted again from the little waiting room. He says you are 2 because he can hear you. The dentist stopped examining the tooth. Only when he had put it on the table with the finished work did he say, so much the better. He operated the drill again. He took several pieces of the bridge out of a cardboard box where he kept the things until he had to do. Okay, he kept the things he still had to do and began to polish the gold. Papa, what? Still hadn't changed his expression. He says if you don't take out his tooth, he'll shoot you. Without hurrying, with an extreme tranquil movement, he stopped pedaling the drill, pushed it away from the chair, and pulled the lower drawer of the table all the way out. There was a revolver. Okay, he said, tell him to come and shoot me. He rolled the chair over the opposite door, his hand he rolled the chair over opposite the door, his hand resting on the edge of the drawer. The mayor appeared at the door. He had shaved the left side of his face, but the other side, swollen and in pain, had a 5-day-old beard. The dentist saw many nights of desperation in his dull eyes. He closed the drawer with his fingertips and said softly, sit down. Good morning, the mayor said. Morning, said the dentist. While the instruments were boiling, the mayor leaned his skull on the headrest of the chair and felt better. His breath was icy. It was a poor office, and an old wooden chair, the pedal drill, a glass case with ceramic bottles. Opposite the chair was a window with a shoulder-high cloth curtain. When he felt the dentist approach, the mayor braced his heels and opened his mouth. Aurelio Escobar turned his head toward the light. After inspecting the infected tooth, he closed the mayor's jaw with a cautious pressure of his fingers. It has to be without anesthesia, he said. Why? Because you have an abscess. The mayor looked him in the eye. All right, he said, and tried to smile. The dentist did not return the smile. He brought the basin of sterilized instruments to the work table and took them out of the water with a pair of cold tweezers, still without hurrying. Then he pushed the spittoon with the tip of his shoe and went to wash his hands in the wash basin. He did all this without looking at the mayor, but the mayor didn't take his eyes off him. It was a lower wisdom tooth. The dentist spread his feet and grasped the tooth with the hot forceps. The mayor seized the arms of the chair, braced his feet with all his strength, and felt an icy void in his kidneys, but didn't make a sound. The dentist moved only his wrist. Without rancor, rather with a bitter tenderness, he said, "Now you'll pay for our 20 dead men." The mayor felt the crunch of bone in his jaw, and his eyes filled with tears, but he didn't breathe until he felt the tooth come out. Then he saw it through the tears. It seemed foreign to his pain that he failed to understand his torture of the 5 previous nights. Bent over the spittoon, sweating, panting, he unbuttoned his tunic and reached for the handkerchief in his pant pocket. The dentist gave him a clean cloth. "Dry your tears," he said. The mayor did. He was trembling. While the dentist washed his hands, he saw the crumbling ceiling and dusty spider web with spider eggs and dead insects. The dentist returned, drying his hands. "Go to bed," he said, and gargle with salt water. The mayor stood up and said goodbye with a casual military salute and walked toward the door, stretching his legs without buttoning up his tunic. "Send the bill," he said. "To you or the town?" The mayor didn't look at him. He closed the door and said through the screen, "It's the same damn thing." Any impressions of the story?
It sounds like political power and corruption. I will say.
What makes you say that?
I would say that because at the point of the story, I'm trying to look at the story here on my end.
Okay.
When he was saying like when he was trying to extract the tooth, how can I explain it?
Yeah.
When he was trying to like extract the tooth, like he wanted, like it's political. I could say that and revenge. So the way he, you know what I mean, right? It's like it's hard to explain it, but
no, but you're there. You're right. You know, when you say you're hot, you're hot. That's the exact point that is there. So,
like I feel like it's more political because, like him being a lower class, I guess the dentist, and I guess the mayor being like having the higher authority, he's like demanding him to take out a tooth for him, even though the dentist doesn't want to do it. Like I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah. No, I mean, Mabel put in the thing.
I'm horrible explaining these things.
No, you're right there. You picked it up. Mabel put it now. The shift in power. Now the dentist has the power. So yeah, if we take let's start building off of what was offered. So we say there's 2 characters, right? There's the dentist, right, and there's the mayor, right? And you were talking about that moment because in that moment when you were talking about the dentist is taking his sweet time, right? Washing his hands. He's not in a hurry, right? He's letting the mayor suffer, right? And then when he's about to take out the tooth, he tells him something, right? "Now you'll pay for the 20 dead men," and then goes in there and starts yanking the tooth out of him, right? So there is a dynamic, a power dynamic that's happening inside of this. And there also is a sense of something about revenge. We don't know exactly, but it has something to do with the 20 dead men. Erica?
Yeah, I was thinking, like when he said he has to do without anesthesia, and he asks us why, he says because you have an abscess. So I'm like, did he just tell him that, or he just really wanted to like punish him?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's another important little point, right? He says this has to be without anesthesia. And he's like, "Why?" And he says, "Why?" He says, "Because of the abscess." We don't even hear about the abscess anything. He doesn't even give him anything. If it was an antibiotic or anything, right? He just said, gargle with salt water, you know. So there was this whole issue of a power dynamic happening with both of these characters, right? And yes, you're right. It's interesting. You know, the dentist, we could say, is almost like working class. It's interesting. At the beginning, it says without a degree, right? That without a degree, that the dentist doesn't have a degree. So, but this seems to be the only dentist in the town, right? Because the mayor is coming to him, right? And then at the very end, here's another tip. When he says, "Should I send the bill?" And he says, "Yes." And he goes, "To you or to the town?" And he says, "It's the same damn thing," right? So that idea of political corruption that you were all picking up on, we know that it's at play because clearly, if you're a politician, there's the government's money and there's the money you get paid as a person. But, if you remember what I talked about, Garcia Marquez, he talks about that, part of like where he comes from, Colombia and a lot of Latin American countries, there's a history of political shakeups and tumults and all that stuff. And a lot of that is because of the blurring of that line and the sense of power, right? Johanny, did you have your hand up?
Yes, that's like using the people's money. That's usually what is when dirty politics.
Right. It's using the money, like the people, the public's money that's supposed to be for the public's good, for whatever, and instead of using it for your freaking dentist bill. I mean, technically, I don't know, in other countries here, politicians get a salary. And from that salary, they pay their rent, they do their things. They don't use the government's money directly to
personal stuff.
Right, to do personal things. So let's go back to the PowerPoint a little bit, because it helps me stay on track somewhat. So here we go. We had the story, right? The characters. We have Aurelio Escobar, who's a dentist, right? He's a father, because we know his little son works for him, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. Right. So we know he's a father because his little son works for him, right? The son is the receptionist out front. He's a middle-class citizen, we could say a working-class citizen. He gives us direct representation of him by saying he's skinny, right, and erect, that he's skinny and tall, right? He talks about, so that's what we call about direct characterization, but we learn a lot about his situation. The fact that he has old equipment, the fact that there's a crumbling ceiling, the fact that there's an old spider web with spider eggs. So these things are telling us something about him and his condition, right? They're not direct representations, they're indirect representations. But then we have the mayor, right? And he has a beard, we know that about him, that he's a powerful man in government. He's violent, he threatens to shoot Aurelio if he doesn't attend to him. And he's killed 20 men, we know that. And Aurelio doesn't agree with that, and he doesn't take no for an answer, right? It wasn't like, you're not gonna see me, I'll shoot you. And I think Aurelio believed it, but Aurelio is not necessarily such a passive character. First he opens the drawer with the gun and he puts his hand on the drawer and he goes, send him in, And then we have Aurelio's son, who's the 11-year-old boy who works for his father. Here's the role of power, right? We talked about this, right? And Aurelio has power to relieve the mayor's pain, right? To heal. He has the gun, which gives him power, and the drill, right? And the mayor has government, the law, and he has gun, which is might as power. So there is definitely a dynamic of power going on with these two. All right, so let me just leave that. So the themes in the stories, right? So one is the conflict between the middle class or the working class and the politicians in the terms of power. So all of you, class A+, and being able to pull out some of the main theme in the story. The story inspires for all who think they have power and try to take advantage, right? Because sometimes you feel like you don't have power, but here we were seeing how power was shifting, right? Mabel said that in the chat. There was a power shift that happened. And it could be even temporary, right? Or for that moment, but still there was a power shift, right? Because even at the end, the mayor says, send a bill, same damn thing. He's going to still continue being this corrupt person. Let's see if I can make this any bigger. Let's see. Oh, sorry. It's a little bigger. So another theme inside of this is revenge. Oops. Revenge, right? The dentist doesn't use anesthesia, causing the mayor to suffer. He tells the mayor it's because of an abscess, but then gives the reason that he pulls the tooth, saying, now you'll pay for our 20 dead men. We don't know what the mayor has done, but the dentist feels wronged by the mayor's involvement with the 20 dead men. He's making him pay with suffering for his wrongdoing. What does this revenge symbolize, right? Balance of power. We went through this. Okay. There's just more. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. So in this tiny little story, we're able to unpack a lot. And so one of these days, we can see it is more of a revengeful title, because he's saying one of these days he will make him pay, right? And I wanted to also point out, just in this, it's like 3.5 pages, this story, just 3.5 pages, and so much happens in the 3.5 pages of it. So what I'm going to ask you to do is the way we pulled out the idea of the role of power, right? Is in here. We could have, if we were gone deeper into it. What I'm going to ask you to do is read another story. It's called The Judge's Wife, and it's by a woman named Isabel Allende. We'll talk more about her, but I'm having us read her story because, in a way, she is also a writer that deals with magical realism in a different kind of way. And so that story is in the packet in your fiction thing. And I'm just gonna read just for fun. Just the opening paragraph. Let's see. The Judge's Wife. Just read the opening lines. Okay. So Nicholas Vidal always knew he would lose his head over a woman. So it was foretold on the day of his birth, and later confirmed by the Turkish woman in the corner store at the one time he allowed her to read his fortune in the coffee grounds. Little did he imagine, though, that it would be on account of Casilda, the judge's Hidalgo's wife. It was on her wedding day that he first glimpsed her. He was not impressed, preferring his woman dark-haired and brazen. This ethereal slip of a girl in her wedding gown, eyes filled with wonder, and fingers obviously unskilled in the art of rousing a man to pleasure, seemed to him almost ugly. Mindful of his destiny, he had always been wary of any emotional contact with women, hardening his heart and restricting himself to the briefest encounters whenever the demands of manhood needed satisfying. So I didn't share my screen, but you all saw me reading it. But that is the beginning of The Judge's Wife. So I want you to read that story, and I'll send you the email. I'll do it before the weekend. I'll send you the email. I want you to be able to identify at least 2 of the themes in this story, right? And you're gonna write a paragraph on each of them, but I'll send you that separately. But that'll be your homework. And then I'm gonna send you 1 question also to explore more deeply the role of power in one of these days, to talk more about, to write we had a discussion about it, but I want you to actually take the discussion and put it into writing. So you'll have a reading assignment and 2 writing assignments, and I'll see you in a week. And then by tomorrow morning, definitely you could look for your essays. So even though we don't meet, if you wanted to, if any of you get your essays and you want to have a meeting like Friday or Tuesday before class or Wednesday before class, just send me an email. We could also set up a meeting before we meet the next time. Okay, is all that clear?
Yes.
Okay, any questions?
I was trying to look at the story in the packet, but I didn't see it. Can you please point it out, Professor?
Sure.
Yes, Professor, I'm doing this and I don't.
All right, I hope it's there. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you.
I think it's a separate attachment.
And so normally you go to course content, right? And you go to fiction. Then the fiction stories. And here's One of These Days. And The Judge's Wife is here. Do you see it?
Yes, I see it. I was trying to see, because you see how it says Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I was trying to see Isabel Allende there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, they're just the One of These Days is there. It's the first one. There's another Garcia Marquez if any of you want to read it, but we're not going to read that one. A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, but we're not going to read it. But there's another one that's there. Okay. All right. Well, have a good night. I'll hang out if people have questions, but if not, thank you for your patience and your attention. and I'll see everybody next week, Wednesday.
Good night.
Yes, sir. Have a good night. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
Bye,
Have a good Professor.
Bye-bye.
Professor?
Yeah. Hey, Rosemary.
Yeah, hi. I didn't see the assignment on discussion, so I think I can send it later.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
Hi.
in the chat, who asked that? Yes, Whaley, I will post the homework. And I'll post it not like, next week, Tuesday at 5 o'clock. I'll do it by tonight or early by tomorrow morning, the latest.
When are they due, Professor?
Those will be due, the responses will probably be due on Sunday. Yes, probably on Sunday. That's usually our deadline.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I could also do like Monday, but Monday's a holiday. So that we take the holiday.
Okay. And I noticed I haven't seen any grades of mine up.
Yeah, no, I think I know I graded your paper, but I'm going to take all the grades. I'm not going to put the graded assignment up on Blackboard. You're going to just get an email directly to your email. And as soon as in the beginning class, once I finish everybody who submitted it, then I'm going to email them all at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Professor.
Hey, Gregory.
In my thesis for the essay, I wrote like an argumental thesis.
Okay.
Is that okay? I mean,
yeah, I was offering that structure, but one of the things I also I like students to be able to nail it, but some students, honestly, the concept of the 5-paragraph essay is the foundational essay, right? And so very often people who do like to pass your GED, you have to be able to write a 5-paragraph essay, right, to get your high school. So that basic kind of essay is an essay that's done in high school. But a lot of times, if you're not writing essays all the time, like it's just you become out of practice, right? So but some people have been writing more, so I don't want people to feel restricted by it. So if you feel inspired and you want to do an argumentative or a different type of essay, as long as the structure's there and is done correctly, I'm not going to be like, he didn't do an expository essay, but whether it's expository or argumentative or compare contrast essay, as long as you do write a good essay, that's what you could be graded on.
okay, because I'm really hard on myself, and it's like try to make this perfect paper and stuff like that. But but also